For 2,000 years, Judas Iscariot has carried one of the heaviest names in human history. His name has become, in dozens of languages and cultures, the word for traitor. Parents throughout the centuries have not named their children Judas. Artists have painted him with distinctive features, so viewers could recognize his villainy at a glance. Theologians have debated his eternal fate, and Sunday school teachers have told the story in terms so straightforward that children can summarize it in a single sentence. Judas sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver because he was greedy. But when you sit down with the actual text of the four Gospels, when you read the original Greek carefully, when you pay attention not just to what the writers tell you happened, but to the specific details they chose to include and the specific details they chose to emphasize, an entirely different portrait begins to emerge. Not simpler, much more complicated, much more human, much more troubling, and ultimately far more relevant to every person who has ever considered themselves a follower of Jesus and wondered whether that following is genuine. Let us start with a question that is almost never asked about Judas, but should be the first question anyone asks. Why did Jesus choose him? Jesus did not stumble into choosing Judas by accident. The Gospel of Luke tells us that before he chose the 12 disciples, Jesus spent an entire night in prayer on a mountainside, all night, alone in prayer. And then, when morning came, and he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them. Judas was one of the 12. The deliberate, prayerful, night-long result of Jesus' communion with his Father included Judas Iscariot, whom he knew would betray him. John chapter 6 makes this even more explicit. Jesus, speaking to his disciples, says, "Have I not chosen you, the 12? Yet one of you is a devil." John adds the explanatory note that he meant Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, who, though one of the 12, was later to betray him. Jesus knew. He had always known. He chose Judas with full knowledge of what Judas would do, and he kept Judas in his inner circle for 3 years. Why? Multiple purposes. Prophetic fulfillment, certainly. The Psalms had predicted the betrayal. The price of 30 pieces of silver was predicted in Zechariah. These things had to happen as written. But beyond prophetic necessity, there is something else going on in the relationship between Jesus and Judas that the text hints at without fully explaining. Jesus treated Judas as a trusted member of the group. He gave Judas the money bag, the responsibility of managing the group's finances. He included Judas in every intimate gathering, every private teaching session, every meal. On the night of the betrayal, when Jesus said, "One of you will betray me," and the disciples began asking who it was, none of them pointed to Judas. None of them suspected him. He had been so consistently part of the group that even on the last night, his fellow disciples did not see him as the obvious candidate. Now here's where the character of Judas begins to come into focus in a way that changes the story. John chapter 12, just 6 days before the Passover on which Jesus would be crucified. The setting is a dinner at the home of Lazarus, the man Jesus had raised from the dead. Mary, the sister of Lazarus, takes an incredibly expensive jar of perfume, pure nard, and pours the entire thing over Jesus' feet, then wipes his feet with her hair. The fragrance fills the whole house. It is an act of extravagant, sacrificial, almost inexplicable devotion, and Judas immediately objects. John records his words precisely. Why was this perfume not sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. It is a completely reasonable-sounding objection, responsible, even righteous. The kind of thing a person with a social conscience and fiscal discipline might say. But John does not let it stand unchallenged, yet he adds a devastating parenthetical statement in the very next verse. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Judas was not expressing concern for the poor. He was looking at a year's worth of money and calculating what portion of it he could have appropriated for himself if it had passed through the money bag he controlled. This single detail is the key to understanding everything that follows. Judas was not a good person who made one catastrophic mistake at the end. He was a person with a hidden corruption that had been present and active throughout his 3 years with Jesus. He had been stealing from the group's finances the entire time. Every time Jesus healed someone and that person made a donation, every time the disciples collected resources for their ministry, Judas had been quietly taking his portion for years. And Jesus knew, he had to have known, the one who knew the thoughts of men, who told the Samaritan woman at the well everything she had ever done, who knew what the Pharisees were thinking before they spoke, absolutely knew that the keeper of his group's money bag was stealing from it. And he kept Judas in the role anyway, for 3 years, without public exposure, without confrontation, at least none that the Gospels record. This is one of the most psychologically complex and theologically dense aspects of the entire Judas narrative. Jesus, who knew everything Judas was doing, continued to include him, to teach him, to break bread with him, to wash his feet on the last night. Was he giving Judas every possible opportunity to change? Was he demonstrating that his love did not depend on the person's worthiness? Was he allowing the plan of salvation to unfold exactly as it had to unfold? Probably all of these things at once. But the effect on Judas was not transformation. The 3 years of proximity to the most extraordinary human being who ever walked the earth did not change the fundamental orientation of Judas's heart. Now, what actually pushed Judas over the edge into the formal arrangement to betray Jesus? The dinner at Lazarus's house gives us a clue. Judas objected to the perfume. Jesus publicly rebuked his objection. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She has done a beautiful thing. You will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me." In front of everyone at the table, Jesus shut down Judas's complaint and praised the woman who had made it. And then, according to Matthew chapter 26, immediately after this episode, Judas went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you?" The connection between the public rebuke and the decision to betray is, at minimum, suggestive. Something broke in that moment, or the moments surrounding it. The 30 pieces of silver, equivalent to the price of a slave under Mosaic law, was not a great sum for a man who had access to the group's money bag. It was not primarily about money. It may have been about control, about revenge for the humiliation, about the resolution of a 3-year tension between what Judas had been pretending to be and what he actually was, about the unbearable weight of being close to perfect goodness when you are carrying concealed corruption. We cannot know exactly what happened in the inner life of Judas between the dinner at Lazarus's house and his arrival at the chief priest's council chambers, but something snapped. Then comes the Passover meal, the Last Supper. Jesus, knowing everything that is about to happen, washes every disciple's feet, including Judas's, serves them all the bread and the cup, and then tells them that one of them will betray him. The disciples are devastated. They begin asking, one by one, "Lord, is it I?" And when Judas asks, Jesus gives him an answer that only Judas could have fully understood in the moment. "You have said so." Then Jesus dips a piece of bread and hands it to Judas, and John records something that should send a chill down every reader's spine. After Judas took the bread, Satan entered him, and Jesus said to him, "What you are about to do, do quickly." Satan entered him, not because Judas was helpless, not because he was singled out for divine punishment without agency, but because Judas had been making a series of choices for years that had systematically opened his heart to this moment. The thefts, the resentments, the unrepentance, the refusal to let the proximity to Jesus do what proximity to Jesus does to people who are truly open to it. Each choice was a door, and Judas had been walking through those doors for a long time. By the time he sat at that Last Supper, he had walked so far down a road that when he stood up from the table, all Satan had to do was step in. And he betrayed Jesus in the garden with a kiss. A kiss. The intimacy of the gesture is part of what makes it so devastating. He used the greeting of a friend to signal an arrest to enemies, and Jesus, when Judas approached him, called him friend. Even then, friend. And then, the detail that everyone remembers, but most people do not fully reckon with. When Judas saw that Jesus had been condemned to death, he was seized with remorse. He ran back to the chief priests and elders and threw the 30 pieces of silver on the temple floor. "I have sinned," he said. for I have betrayed innocent blood." And the chief priests and elders looked at him with complete indifference. "That is your problem, not ours," they said, and turned away. He felt real remorse. He used the right words. He knew exactly what he had done and said it plainly. And he tried to undo the transaction, but he took his guilt to the people who had used him instead of to the one who could have forgiven him. And in that moment, the contrast between Judas and Peter, who was simultaneously weeping bitterly after his 3 denials of Jesus, becomes the sharpest in the entire New Testament. Peter took his guilt to Jesus. Eventually, Judas took his guilt to a dead end, and the road Judas had been walking for 3 years ended where roads like that end. The story of Judas is not primarily a story about greed. It is a story about what happens inside a person who lives in the presence of light and refuses to let it change him. About concealed corruption that is never brought into the open. About the slow accumulation of small decisions that eventually becomes a character, and a character that eventually becomes a destiny. About the terrifying possibility of being close, very close, historically close, to the Son of God and remaining fundamentally untouched. And it is a story about the 2 roads that open up before every person who recognizes what they have done. One road leads back to the one you betrayed. The other road leads away from him. Peter took one road, Judas took the other, and the only real difference between them in the end was direction.